Good morning and a warm welcome. I'm Holly for Kalkine TV, reporting to you live from Sydney, and you're watching the Global Markets Roundup. Let's dive into some key highlights and happenings from yesterday, starting with the US market. Well, record-setting world stocks moved higher on Thursday after jobless claims data suggested the US labor market was charging ahead, even as new COVID-19 infections surged, while the risk of a subpar US payroll report kept the dollar on the defensive. MSCI's World Stock Index, which measures equity performance in 50 countries, rose 0.19% after pairing early gains, and was still on track to post its fifth consecutive closing high. Benchmark US indices closed higher yesterday, September the 2nd, pulled up by gains in energy stocks after global oil cartel OPEC decided to go ahead with its planned production increase. The S&P 500 was up 0.28%, the Dow Jones gained 0.37%, and the Nasdaq Composite rose 0.14% as well, while the small cap Russell 2000 was up a generous 0.74%. Energy stocks rallied in the intraday trading a day after OPEC and its partners decided to stick to their previous plan to increase oil production, and in addition, investors were buoyed by the labor data. On Thursday, the Labor Department announced that the number of unemployment benefits claims declined by 14,000 to 340,000 last week, the lowest level since mid-March. Other data from the U.S. Census Bureau showed that the U.S. international trade deficit in goods and services plummeted to $70.1 billion in July from $73.2 billion the previous month. The decline has been attributed to the increase in exports and decrease in imports. And energy and healthcare stocks were the top gainers on the S&P 500 on Thursday. Communication and tech stocks were the bottom movers as 7 of 11 sectors stayed in the green. Well, moving on now to the futures and commodities market, and gold futures were down 0.24%, silver decreased by 1.17%, while copper rose 0.46% to $4,000.2975 US. And Brent oil futures increased as well 1.65% to 72.77 US a barrel, and WTI was up as well 1.65% to 69.72 US a barrel. In the bond markets, the 30-year Treasury bond yields were down 1.07%, while the 10-year bond yields fell 1.16%. Meanwhile, the US dollar futures index decreased by 0.26% to 92.21 US. Now it's time for a small break, but stay tuned because I'll be right back to look at the Asian and Australian market updates.
Tune in to get the latest information.
Whether it's about market movements or the currency graph,
Sectoral coverage or industry news.
we cover it all on our news segments.
Be on top of the latest news
With Kalkine TV. Welcome back, I'm Holly and you're watching the Global Markets Roundup. Well, European shares closed higher on Thursday as expectations of improving economic growth supported oil stocks, while drug maker Swedish orphan Bibotrium was the top performer on the Stoxx 600 after accepting an $8 billion takeover offer. The Pan-European Stoxx 600 index rose 0.3%, with oil stocks adding 1.8% as crude oil prices surged on optimism over an economic recovery, a sharp decline in US crude stocks, and a weaker dollar. The London markets traded on a mixed note as investors eyed fresh growth catalysts, and moreover, crude oil prices drove higher, benefited by a reduction in US jobless claims and a decline in US reserves. Melrose Industries shares surged by about 6.60%, after the company stated that the trading remained well ahead of expectations with lower debt. Moreover, the company had reinstated interim dividend payments, and CMC market shares plunged by around 27.48% after the company had reported subdued market activity during July and August. Furthermore, the year-to-date client income retention remained below the target of 80%, as Eurozone bond yields dipped on Thursday but traded within striking distance of 6-week highs. As markets remained on the edge ahead of Friday's US jobs report after the hawkish European bank officials pushed the case for the tightening policy. And Germany's 10-year government bond yield traded 1 basis point lower at 0.38%. Moving on now to the Asian markets, and Japan's Topix ended at more than 5-month peak on Thursday, recovering from earlier losses as a tech rally offset a slump in transport shares. The Topix rose 0.14% to its highest closing level since 29th of March. The index rallied for a 4th straight session, and Nikkei shares average ended 0.33% higher, as its highest since the 14th of July. Meanwhile, Shanghai's benchmark share index ended higher as well on Thursday, and Chinese blue chip stocks closed unchanged, as investors hoped soft economic data could lead Beijing to roll out further support measures. The Shanghai Composite Index ended 0.84% higher at 3,597.04. And the blue chip CS 1300 index crept up from the small losses to end flat. This comes as South Korean shares ended lower on Thursday, ending a 4-day rally, as investors awaited a key US jobs data for clues on when the Federal Reserve might start reducing its pandemic-era stimulus. The Kospi entered down at 31.17 points at over 3,175, pulled down by tech heavyweights. The Australian share market opened on a positive note this morning after US stocks moved higher overnight. The global equities surged after jobless claims data revealed that US labor market climbed ahead despite a recent rise in COVID-19 cases. The ASX 200 fell 0.55% to 7,485.7 on Thursday. Shares fell the previous session as investors booked profits on several stocks. Ampol, Bendigo and Adelaide Bank and Baruva Solutions are a few shares going ex-dividend today. Yesterday, crude oil prices surged over $1 per barrel to a rebound in optimism about global economic growth despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and higher than anticipated fall in US crude inventories. Brent crude closed 2% higher at just over $73 US a barrel, while WTI finished 2% higher at $69.99 US a barrel. Energy stocks like Woodside Petroleum and Santos could also be trading higher today. Gold prices fell on Thursday as investors ignored a weak dollar and squared positions with a focus on today's non-farm payrolls data. The numbers are expected to determine the US Federal Reserve's tapering strategy, as spot gold fell 0.2%, while US gold futures settled down 0.3%. ASX-listed gold stocks like Northern Star Resources and Newcrest Mining could also be trading lower today. And Chinese coking coal futures climbed 8% to hit their all-time high. Benchmark iron ore futures edged lower 0.6% to 774 yuan per ton at the close. Aluminium prices were driven by a 10-year high on Thursday, on a growing concern that restrictions on production of the metal in China are squeezing the supply. Well, benchmark aluminium on the London Metal Exchange was up 0.1% to just over 2,690 a ton. And the benchmark LEM copper was up 0.5% at just over 9,300 a ton. and zinc rose 0.1% as well. Nickel added 0.4%, and lead gained 1.4%. Plus, tin was down 0.2% at 33,470 US. Well, that is all for now in the Global Markets Roundup, but keep watching Kalkine TV for more live market updates. Holly Shields signing off.